Okay, animal communication, introduction and evolutionary history. I didn't actually record this, but I talked a bit about the possibility of finding extraterrestrial life that's intelligent enough to speak to us, and whether if it came, it would be like us trying to speak to a cat. Communication, passage of information through our different senses, sight, scent or chemical, sound, touch, taste, perhaps, and that influences, those signals influence behavior of other animals, and the transmission of information via a signal benefiting both signaler and receiver. Well, with a caveat, sometimes a signaler is actually sending a deceptive signal. So, with that in mind, is there a difference between a cue and a signal? Well, you can read this. Cues are leaked, easily assessed, info an animal may not want revealed. Signals are functional, contain info that animals want to reveal because it benefits it, and that includes revealing deceptive signal. Yeah, I guess I do. Do you remember that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, do you know when humans started to have language? Like, why humans started to have language? You were talking about how you'll learn language by a certain age.
Yeah.
You'll have the ability to
Learn it later.
learn it. So what?
Yeah.
Have researchers?
Well, they were there's this gene that produces a protein is FOXP2, and we have a form of FOXP2. It's highly conserved. It seems to be associated with language because if people have a different form of it, they usually can't talk. Okay. Now, in other species, there's like been 3 amino acid substitutions, which doesn't mean very many. But all vertebrates, it seems, have it. And it wasn't until Svante Pabo and his group in Germany started being able to sequence archaic DNA that they thought, well, maybe we can tell, whether Neanderthal actually had language based on the idea of the FOXP2. Now, it's not really a strong inference because they could still have the FOXP2, and it might just be that they can't make language as well as we can, but they still have the brain to do it. Because obviously, a lot of language requires, dedicated part of our brain towards understanding it. So, but they had the same FOXP2 that we did. So we're inferring with, maybe a little trepidation that they were able to speak. There's also been some work on with linguists. So you can make a phylogeny of languages the same way you can make a phylogeny of species. There's the Indo-European languages that we're all familiar with, Latin and all that. There's many others. There are some languages that there's only one language for that group, and then over the hill, let's say in New Guinea, they have about 8,000 different languages or something like that. It's tremendous. And language, certainly, being able to speak a language or not tells the other person a lot about. In fact, not just speak, just think about accents and, right, dialects. I mean, a lot of us probably make decisions about other people based on how they talk. what dialect they speak. Okay.
So they think speaking came before writing.
Oh, by far.
Like not writing words, obviously you can't speak, but even like writing in like pictures, like how you imagine what they.
There was nothing like that until pretty recently.
So then it could have just been some sort of genetic mutation
Yeah.
that allowed them to speak.
Now the thing is, there's other animals that actually make different sounds for different things. Prairie dogs and ground squirrels, they make a different sound when a hawk is coming compared to, let's say, a coyote or a snake.
If they get more mutations, they may one day be able to form a language
Yeah.
over the course of
Well, yeah, there's more to language though than just different words. There's also, the whole grammatical structure. But certainly other species, as you would expect, that it wouldn't come full-blown in only one lineage and not another. So it's probable that language is has been evolving, and in certain lineages there's stronger selection for it, or it's just a quirk, and then there's strong selection for it. So, but anyway, there was a guy who did he did a phylogeny of languages, and then he laid that on a phylogeny of different human populations. And then he also looked at, more importantly, certain words that seem to be universal versus some words that are only for one language. And he claims that he's shown, now there's been some dispute about it, but there's certainly a signal there that 100 and something thousand years ago, or 200,000 years ago in Africa, our language was started. Now, of course, there's Neanderthal and archaic humans, Erectus and all that, and we don't know what kind of language they had. So I'd say it's been in a human lineage, it's probably been incrementally favored for better and better language.
So like, keeping on this topic, they've done studies where they're able to give vocab to a chimp or a gorilla.
Oh yeah,
And then
yeah.
within their natural settings though, do they have a vocab, their own vocab as well?
Well, they certainly have, okay, in captivity they've had a mother teach a child. In wild settings, you can have one group that comes up with a new way of doing things, let's say, and it actually, others look and it actually spreads. A good example is Japanese macaque monkeys. There was this troop that lived down near the shore, and there was a river coming through it, and it was sandy too, right? So a lot of times the food would drop in the sand and people would kind of brush it off. The monkeys would brush it off and then eat it, and it's still sandy, right? Well, this macaque actually, I don't know, maybe it was by accident, maybe she dropped it in, had some food and she dropped it in the water, then took it out, it wasn't sandy anymore. And then also, it seems like they like their food to have salt in it. And so they were dipping it in the ocean as well. Well, this cultural information actually spread to the whole troop, where almost every member was doing it except for the oldest. Now the oldest were set in their ways, I've always had food with sand on it, and I'm not going to change now. Okay. But it did spread. So in that sense, there can be transmission from one to another, and there's only one group of chimps that actually hunts with a stick, bush babies, and there's been another. I saw another paper recently, so there's been some demonstration of that. Now, whether they actually use it in terms of words, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think they do it in terms of words, but they certainly might have more meanings to the hoots and all that they do. than we give them credit for. Okay. So, rich language, easy word. Each word can have many meanings. Most understood communication is verbal in us, but there's others certainly. Animals, limited repertoire. Many signals mean only one thing. Communicate via various means, mostly not auditory. Mainly because, well, auditory is good for some things, some habitats or some situations, and not for others. So, the basic attributes of communication: you need a sender, a signal, and a receiver that recognizes that signal. It doesn't have to explicitly recognize that signal, but it knows what it means. And, of course, that signal could be a fixed action pattern that initiates a response in others around it to do some other pattern. So if you think about bees in a hive, honeybees, a lot of the dance that they do is actually a fixed action pattern. They don't go out and learn how to do signaling about where food sources are. It's a fixed action pattern. They're always going to be able to do it. Now, they come in with some information about where there's a food source, which direction, how high it is, perhaps even what kind of food it is. They do a whole waggle dance that tells everybody else around them that there's food here. And then they all go out and go find the food. And they're not thinking, oh, I'm going to go out and find food. This is what initiates everything with them. Yep, there we go. Goddamn cops. So, this is what they do. There's a waggle dance, information, the others and that same one go out and forage at that location. Okay? They don't have to think about it. And then there's others where there's intentional thinking, learning how to, obviously, how to talk. The message, now it can be a visual message, a scent, a sound, tactile, vocal, even other ways to communicate, electrical signals, echolocation. Okay. Communication is usually for members of your own species, but I don't know if I really agree with that. But some signals and messages have evolved to communicate with other species. So, examples are alarm calls within a group to group members, or warning signals, or something like that. But of course, there's a lot of stuff going on where there's a signal between, let's say, a prey item and a predator, like the pronking business, or a male bird that's brightly colored, but it tells the hawk that's coming in, I see you, so don't waste your time. The communication, if it's actually both are getting it's honest, it's a real information that they're both the sender is trying to send to the receiver, then it's usually adaptive for both sides. For mating displays, all that kind of stuff. So it contributes directly to the animal's fitness. All sorts of things like that. The antelope and the cheetah, it's actually, the antelope is saying, don't chase me, and doesn't have to expend the energy because the cheetah sees and says, it's an honest signal. I wish I could chase you and get you, but I can't, so don't even waste my time. So, the sender and the receiver must have the appropriate mechanisms for sending the signal and actually receiving it and being able to translate that information. So sometimes it's structures. Well, like ears. We have ears. We use them for all sorts of different things. We also use them for language. And if we didn't have them, we wouldn't be able to obviously communicate. So if we're deaf, if you have one individual who's deaf and one who's not, and one's talking to the other, well, it's not going to do very much good. Poison dart frog, right? Aposematic coloration, that's a pretty bright signal. A lot of things that are warning colorations they have to be bright. You don't want to be inconspicuous in that situation. You wouldn't want a camouflaged individual. Well, why use camouflage if you have a toxin that keeps things away? They're not necessarily voluntarily sending a signal. It's part of its morphology, but other frogs and other animals that might want to eat it. So it's basically walking around saying, "Don't eat me," even though it's not trying to say that. One signal, sometimes two messages. What other use might this bright coloration have besides deterring predation, let's say? Yeah, find a babe. Exactly. So, a lot of times now, usually there's sexual dimorphism, but usually, a lot of times the male is bright, but in this case both are, but they both might use that as a signal for mating and courtship. Okay. Obviously visual, these are different ways they communicate: visual, auditory, chemical, touch or tactile. There's a nice touch. Chemical, electrical, echolocation. I got chemical signals. So a whole bunch of them. Some that we don't have. So for those of us who went to the Mojave, of course, rattlesnakes, they're pit vipers, and they can receive, information about something's warmer than something else. But that other something else, they're not trying. Those rodents, let's say, are not trying to give that signal out. It's just something that happens. Okay, so that's more of a cue. Okay, here we go. So, anyway, the common senses we have, and then there's others. Obviously, electric. There's also, let's see, what else? Oh, echolocation, that sort of thing. In fact, so those are ultra high frequency kind of sounds, but beyond what we can normally hear. Oh, we already did. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, so as far as visual signals, how do you guys know when fruit is ripe? Changes color? Yeah.
I still got the grocery store.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
that's the best thing to do. I mean,
They know.
obviously, you go to the produce section, you ask the guy, what's the best watermelon, let's say. Yeah, I agree. But birds, when they want to eat fruit, they can't do that, unfortunately. I guess they could try, but they wouldn't get very far. So, anyway, plants are actually communicating as well. They're saying, come, eat me. Now, when a bird comes along and eats those blackberries, sometime later he'll poop it out away from the parent plant. Sometimes close by, maybe he's actually sitting on the parent plant just eating and eating and eating. It goes underneath. Other times far away. And so, let's see, what was this? Oh, yeah. So, a lot of times we have what are called anthocyanins, which are pigment-producing proteins. In fact, one of the researchers, Jeannie Vanderdon, is doing stuff with anthocyanins and the Silver Sword Alliance in Hawaii, the one that kind of radiated. So, there's also, it turns out, a lot of birds can see in the UV spectra, which we can't. So, and as you know, a lot of insects especially do for pollination. So you actually look at it, at something in the UV spectrum in terms of what the flowers look like. It's almost like a landing strip for insects. But there's also UV spectra in this, and so that changes in terms of how ripe the fruit is as well. So, but there's all kinds of different, visual communications. So it's between plants and animals, between animals and animals, all that. So there's a bunch of pros and cons. It's transmitted instantly. A picture is worth 1,000 words, carries a lot of information. Let's see, highly directional and specific. So like those fruits, or like golden frog that was, it's pretty direct. The receiver is getting the signal loud and clear. Let's see. Oh, yeah, it can be done with body color, so think about breeding plumage or sexual dimorphism between males and females, and that's all part of signaling and sexual selection. So, cons, can't really go over a long distance necessarily. Easily blocked by interference. Let's say you're in a dense forest. It's dark and dense and there's trees in the way, so it only goes so far. In a situation like that, you're probably better off making an auditory signal. So, who are the male birds singing to? Females? Anybody else? Other males? Anybody else? How about,
Predators?
yeah, could be. Absolutely. So, let's see this. This was a white-throated sparrow. They put playback speakers in various territories, and then let's see, number of so this tells about intrusions from, let's say, other males, that in fact the playback is keeping the other males away until they finally figure out what's going on. I did a lot of that when I was doing my master's degree. I had a playback, and I also had a stuffed varied thrush. His name was Harold. Other male varied thrushes would come in and peck at him. He didn't fare too well. In fact, actually, after a while, the only place you could find him was in a bar, drinking a lot. He looked disheveled, you know, the whole bit. It's kind of bad news. But anyway, you can see sometimes that intrusions. Now, see, there was already, of course, a predator there. So, another very threshold in that territory. So, you know, he got up in arms. So, this is more of the same stuff. Mate attraction, the females. So let's see. Mean distance was less, and mean trill rate was higher when it went to white crown number 1 or white crown number 2. Same sort of thing with Cassin's finch. Mean song length. So, let's see, what did they do here? I think they present and absent. Oh, okay. So, I forget exactly what they did. I'll have to look it up. Sorry, you guys. But anyway, it pretty much shows that Cassin's males are responding. I'm pretty sure Cassin's males are responding differently. So, obviously, what are the pros and cons? Same sort of thing. You don't have to worry about visual obstacles. Can be done in the dark. Can be fast and immediate. Can be lengthy and complex. Subject to interference, distorts over distance, works only in the present. So a chemical scent would actually work later on, right? Whereas like visual stuff, for the most part, and auditory stuff, it only works in the present. So there's a guy named Marler, I think it was Peter Marler, who looked at songbirds and the kinds of different songs they sing in different habitats. So, in open habitats, I think a lot of the songs are, I'm trying to think, kind of lower than in forest habitat, where there's a lot of the singing is higher frequency. And it all depends on the habitat and what sound carries better than others. Now, there's another thing that sound signals. There's a lot of birds that are kind of ventriloquists, and they can actually make it sound like they're actually over here when they're really over here. So, not only can they give you, real knowledge on a signal, that could be on a signal, but they can also, instead of calling in like a predator, they can make it seem like they're here on their territory, but the predator is being deceived. So I'd say all of us probably use olfactory signals. Just think about how you guys felt who were out in the Mojave Desert on day 2 or 3. There's definitely olfactory stuff going on. Might have been an honest signal, too, that you stank, pretty much. Okay, so anyway, there's a lot of olfactory signals are really common. Obviously insects with pheromones, all that kind of stuff. A lot of mammals, especially mammals who are nocturnal, right? So a visual signal isn't going to do much good. Let's see. It's really kind of interesting. There's the naked mole rat. There's a mole rat queen, Okay, she's the only one that breeds. And like a lot of other social insects, where there's a queen and all the workers are related and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's not quite like that, but she also actually stops other females in the group from breeding by emitting a pheromone. So it's kind of a signal, well, it's a signal that they automatically respond to. And then there's also, she's also pretty nasty. So she goes around and beats people up who aren't doing what she wants them to do. So. And remember, chemical olfactory, same thing with like plants and animals, plant-animal interactions. So you can have fragrance for certain flowers are more fragrant than others. Usually fragrance is flowers that kind of, their main pollinator comes out at night. They emit a fragrance. Or think about that, the orchid that was deceiving the male wasp, because the orchid kind of made a little thing that looked, well, roughly like a female, but the main thing was it actually copied the pheromone to draw the male in. So it was using an olfactory signal to bring a male in. Male tried to copulate with the flower, didn't get very far. Oh, by the way, yeah, go on.
Oh, because you were talking about smells and plants that they release these fragrant smells. What about foul smells?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
Some plants release these foul smells, like female ginkgo
Mm-hmm.
smells like rotting flesh.
Yeah, there's a lot of flowers that actually look like rotting flesh and smell like rotting flesh. Okay, and of course flies come in to lay their eggs, and they're being deceived as well. They get pollinated to go off to another flower that smells like rotting flesh, and they carry the pollen back and forth. And there's convergent evolution on that in Asia, in Australia, many different places, South America. It's a pretty common deceptive tool. So certainly olfactory chemical smells, and we'll get to that later in terms of what animals are actually trying to communicate. In many cases, of course, they're trying to deceive. So here's pretty cool. This is a ground squirrel, and the squirrel is actually, let's see, tongue flicks. Oh yeah, the squirrel is essentially hiding itself in a chemical smell from the rattlesnake. So, in terms of what the snake is actually responding to, instead of smell, well, they're using smell, but they think this is another snake coming around. They don't really do a lot of tongue flicks, right? So, as you can see, both with just the squirrel and not having all that aroma all over itself, the snake is obviously very, responding. But in this case, the rodent is actually trying to hide that smell. Kind of what you might do in certain circumstances, You might be undercover and you want to smell like a bum, and so, whatever. Anyway. So the sender, first of all, doesn't have to be present, and it can also happen anytime. Good for darkness, can transmit over distance. There's another, it's great. There's this fruit in Southeast Asia called durian. Anybody ever heard of that? Yeah. So it stinks. In fact, if you go to Singapore and you take a durian fruit into a building, they'll arrest you. Okay, it's not to be done. But it smells like kind of like well, different durian fruit, kind of different, but like a moldy, awful locker room. Okay, it's I don't even know. You wonder, okay, why? Because the main dispersers of durian are mammals. Well, they can smell that, but it actually tastes really good. But the smell is completely contrary. It's weird. It's really weird. So, okay. Obviously, it dissipates over time, but at least it stays there for a certain period of time. You have to return and remark, but like I said, auditory, you can't really do that. Well, you can do it right then and there, but you can't, you can keep having to make, let's say, a bird making song to warn intruders away. So smell is, and also, of course, smell, there's more of an olfactory language that's going on here. That a lot of animals, like I said, so the naked mole rat uses smell to stop other females in the group from actually breeding. I don't think the females obviously think about not breeding, it just shuts them down. Okay? So olfaction can do all sorts of different things. So, tactile. It's amazing, if you really think about it, how responsive humans are to touch. Don't you think? I mean, well, we've got all these, nerve endings and all that, and a lot of it has to do with our fingers, but it's also, a lot of that stuff, that tactile stuff, feels really, really, really good. And you can see how it would have a huge effect, especially in a social group, tactile communication. Of course, you could also do it another way, tactile boxing. One guy knocks the other guy out. That's not such a nice way to do it, right? But in general, there's a lot of examples of what are called, social grooming. In fact, okay, but there's also a lot of times younger individuals or less dominant individuals are actually doing it to the more dominant ones. But I don't know exactly. I'm sure they've worked it out, but I think there's other cases where everybody does it to everybody. Hello. You just missed a really cool video.
We should play it again for her.
Yeah, we should.
Oh, you should play it again.
Yeah.
Nah. Sorry. So anyway, there's more dynamic going on there. So tactile is kind of huge, especially for social animals. But anything. Obviously, when a cheetah is running down a gazelle, there's some tactile stuff going on there as well. So, a lot of fish use electrical fields to let others know. And, of course, a lot of, electric fish, they not only use it to stun their prey, but to also perhaps warn predators that, you mess around, I'm going to give you a pretty good shock. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, let's see. So,
Animal porn, baby.
yeah, exactly. Okay. So, evolution of communication. So here we have the old comparative method, right? And we're looking at, let's say, how in a group of related birds, shorebirds or ocean birds, they have developed these alternate forms of communication. So at the base are pelicans and gannets, and then they do certain things pre-takeoff. They do sky pointing, the boobies, alternate wing waving, slow wing waving, throwback, rapid flutter. So all these different, you can see how these are homologous behaviors. They are inherited from their from a common ancestor, but at the same time, each one has actually developed their own sort of, let's say, mating dance. If you've ever seen, let's see, albatrosses going through mating, or let's say cranes, they go through this huge ritual, and you know, different species of albatross have different sorts of rituals. So when you look at communication signals, and of course these signals can be for all sorts of different things, but let's say for mating in this in particular, it's a nice way to actually look at doing a comparative analysis in terms of both ancestor inheriting it as well as under natural selection. And also, there's another thing too. If you think about it, a lot of these behaviors have to occur during development. So, like for a lot of songbirds, of course, the males are practicing. They have got that underlying template for each species, let's say, but then they have to hear the song and practice it. And so this sort of thing, the same sort of thing, they go through actually developing these kinds of signals. Now, I don't think it goes like, the ontogeny, phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny. In other words, a lot of times, if you look at a chicken embryo and a human embryo, at one point they both have tails, they both have gill slits. So it's kind of, in a way, kind of recapitulating phylogenetic things that when we were fish or whatever. But I don't know if the development of behavior acts in the same way. I'm not really sure. I think it's probably just one of those things that you get better and better at it. But a lot of it, I don't know. Yeah. So it turns out, remember noctuid moths, we talked about those and how they respond to signals from ultrasound signals from bats. And depending on how far away, we'll get more into it when we do the next chapter, but depending on how far away the bat is, it will either kind of, if it's far away, just fly off somewhere. If it's really close, it actually kind of turns the moth into, they lose control over all their flight muscles, and they do kind of like, whirly whoops, almost a random movement anyway that might confuse the bat. Well, it turns out that these same things that are designed pretty much, or their function is to take evasive action and hear bats, they also use in terms of communication amongst each other. So, let's see. So, a whistling moth ancestor may have had mechanoreceptor cells that gave it, what did I do? Oh, I didn't finish that off. Anyway, so it turns out this shows this thoracic plate. They also have a way, obviously, to make these ultrasonic sounds as well. There's no reason if you're just trying to evade bats to do that. I don't think. Maybe, I wonder if they do that. That's a good question. I'm thinking maybe they could also screw up with bats if they put out an ultrasonic signal as well. I'm not that fine. Yeah.
What's the difference between auditory and this?
Well, ultrasonic is just the spectrum of sound that we just can't hear. That's all. So it's
like
auditory.
Ultraviolet.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yep. So I don't know what dogs obviously can hear higher pitches, but bats and moths much higher.
So would dogs be using ultrasound?
I don't think they're not. I don't think they're. It's high enough for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean a dog whistle. You've heard it. It's not much.
What,
For the dog is. Oh, okay. Anyway, that's very hard to hear anything, but the dog responds to it. So, but that would be interesting if they actually, yeah, because other animals use sound to deceive opponents. Let's say.
I know blue whales have sounds that you can't hear.
Yeah. Right.
They're really loud.
Yeah, they're usually. Oh, that's right. Yeah, and they obviously travels over huge distances. Yeah. So, the ancestral signals can be actually. This is exaptation. Can be kind of co-opted for new functions, right? Kind of like what was going on with the moth responding to the bats, as well as using it as a means of communication. So here's another phylogeny for bowerbirds. I guess they use the catbird as the outgroup. So the ancestral state is monogamy in birds, serial monogamy. But in this case, they have a polygynous system where the male builds a bower, kind of like a lek, attracts the female. If you remember, there was one, I think the satin bowerbird likes blue objects. And so the females come in, and if the bower is good enough, then she mates with them. But he doesn't help her out at all. So polygyny is where you have a male and many females. Okay. But it looks like that same sort of thing, in terms of bower building and bower decoration, was co-opted for an aggressive display. And if you remember the eagles that were cowling locking, they did both as a antagonistic interaction, playing a game of chicken, and also, of course, in mating display. So the males and females do the same sort of thing. They do the cartwheels. They just don't hold it off to the very, very bitter end. So you can actually, in terms of a comparative method, you can see how communications can be co-opted for other functions, not just for mating in this case. So there's that. Agonistic behavior is basically, being mad at each other. Those little monkeys that we saw, snow monkeys in Japan, they seem so, cute and relaxed, but these are related, and they're actually pretty nasty. I got attacked by a bunch of macaque monkeys when I was in Singapore. I had really long, big, bushy hair, It was huge. And I guess I said something like booga booga or something to one of them. And all of a sudden I was surrounded by this troop of, mad macaques. It was a bad deal. From what I understand, the Singapore government, they're the ones that have banned durian fruit inside. I guess they knocked them all off. Too many people were getting harassed by these monkeys. But, so just so you know, they're not just all nice critters, and just don't go up to them and pet them. Or if you go to Japan, I don't know if you want to get into the hot tub with them. Who knows? Okay. Let's see here. Okay. So, a lot of, anybody know what sensory exploitation is? What do you think? Sensory exploitation.
A situation where a signaler is able to tap into a pre-existing sensitivity or bias in the perceptual system of a receiver.
Right?
Oh, right
That's
there.
right there. Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, so, for example, let's say there's these birds that feed on these nice red berries. And they're living next to, we're almost trying to go, but they're living next to a nuclear power plant that has a meltdown like Chernobyl. There's some mutations, and one of the mutations are these red feathers that happen. And it turns out that males with red feathers on their forehead, they look kind of like maybe a berry, just kind of. And so the female starts responding to that signal because she's already got a pre-existing sensory bias for a red berry. Salute. Salute. So this is there's these spiders, and the net stance probably may have evolved first as a predatory thing, and then it was finally used for the different function of mating as well. So here's a female with a whole bunch of eggs. More sensory exploitation, where a signaler is able to tap into a sensitivity. So female guppies originally were attracted to orange spots. Females with stronger preferences for males with orange spots. Sensory explanation, the domain that the signal is maladaptive for the receiver. So there was something in the environment that the female was sensitive to in terms of orange. And then basically it was a matter of transference. Okay. So same sort of thing, sensory preferences. So there can be preferences that the species has actually never encountered before. We'll stop here, but that the female, let's say, still responds to, let's say, a larger crest, or let's say large crest for the most part. Breast, small crest, okay, and breast crest, not much. Okay, so I think that's that. That's a good thing, okay. Large crest, okay. So, God, I thought I did a different one with this, but anyway, there we go. Okay, now, on the bottom is a zebra finch, male. This is what they look like in real life. And now in this case, it seems like females, well, here's a big white crest, a none crest, a red crest, and a green crest. None, okay. So when they have a big white crest, and they don't come that way in nature, basically what they took was super glue, and they super glued a crest onto the bird's head. But the male was probably, nonplussed at first until all the females started jumping on him, and then he quickly forgot about the problem, right? So, now, in nature, I mean, females would never see that. So the question is, why are the females responding to it? If that's actually, let's say, a sexual display, it was never there before. Now, his hypothesis is that there's a sensory preference that pre-exists in the current species that have never encountered a particular signal before. So zebra finches don't have crests, neither do their relatives. Okay, so you would think, okay, maybe a close relative has something like that and it's just a phylogenetic signal, but it's not. Does this experiment support the hypothesis that zebra finches have a sensory preference for a novel signal? And what color feathers would you guess female zebra finches use to line in their nests, and why? Oh, maybe that's what it is. Huh. So that's probably what it is. Okay. It turns out, I guess, zebra finch females line their nests with certain colors, perhaps preferably white, and perhaps that's why. Now, if that's the case, though, how come they're just not taking the crest from the male and lining their nest with it, or taking the whole male and saying, I could line my nest with a whole male. That'd be even better. Then he wouldn't go away and copulate with other females, too. So, okay. So, there's these fish. Let's see, maculatus. It's a platyfish and swordtails. And male swordtails, of course, they have a very long sword. It's been tested. It's not for any other function, like catching prey or anything like that. With a phylogeny here, so swordtail. God, it looks like, that's strange. Oh, this is, okay, okay, past to the present. It's all upside down. Okay, so there was a common ancestor here between the platyfish and the origin of a swordtail of some sort. So these guys got a small one, larger, and the big one. And then you've got these caudal fins. Well, it turns out there's one caudal platyfish that actually has a small little tail. God, would you even notice that? But I guess it's an example of, what's the panda principle again?
Right there.
Development of a nature.
Yeah. I think I put that, was that on the test?
That's so not fair.
No, it was on the study guide.
Yeah, it was on the study guide.
So I didn't ask you on the test then.
No.
See, I'm nice.
13 pages and 2.5 hours later.
Actually, in one sense, I know. My bad. But in another sense, because I want to put myself in a good light, it was actually a good test to see what you guys actually knew. Wasn't it?
No.
Now, how about if it wasn't graded? It was just to find out what you guys knew.
But why don't we do that and find out? Why don't you don't grade them?
Just give us A's on that.
No, I'll grade them and then I'll keep it a secret. Yeah,
Yeah, keep it a secret from your grade book.
right. Exactly. That's what I mean. Keep it out of the grade book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
tell us.
fine. Don't, not, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can see how much we know and how much
Right.
we don't know.
Exactly. So anyway, the panda principle.
About it first.
If you guys remember a panda doesn't have an opposable thumb. But they have kind of an opposable thumb, but it's not one of the 5 digits. It's actually a bone in the wrist that's been co-opted for that use. Now you would think it would have been better just to use one of the digits already. I mean, you know, there's a lot of animals that actually have somewhat opposable thumbs, us and chimpanzees, and you look at raccoons and how they don't have an opposable thumb, but they're pretty dexterous. So, regardless, the panda has evolved, or that lineage has evolved this opposable thumb that it uses so it can strip off from bamboo certain shoots that it eats. That's all it really eats is bamboo. Seems like so in other words, this isn't a big hay burner, because that's all bamboo is. It's just, it's like a grass, it's just a big grass. So, now, in this case, it looks like perhaps there was a pre-existing, well, there was a little bit of a thing here. Perhaps females didn't respond to it at all, right? But because of that origin, perhaps this led to this lineage of swordtails, and then perhaps females responded to it. So maybe not a whole lot at first, but enough. And then, of course, it got bigger and bigger and bigger until it got like Hellerii, whatever it is. And the male has a very long one. Same thing, you see, there's a hummingbird species, you know, little guy, very brightly colored with a tail like this long. It's amazing. So, now we're going to be talking about handicaps. So, tell me what's a handicap.
Something that prevents you from reaching your full fitness.
Okay. Why would someone have a handicap?
It could be a vestigial trait, or it could be, something that doesn't have a direct relationship to your fitness.
Okay. How does it relate to an honest signal?
Because you can't lie if you have an honest signal. It's like the peacock's
Tail.
feathers. Yeah, the tail, whatever.
Yeah.
You can't lie about that.
Okay.
You can't hide it. You can't
So in other words, actually, how does that relate to a handicap then? Is it a handicap for the male in some way? Does
Could
it?
be.
Yeah. How would it
Yeah.
lower a male's fitness?
It could, for predators, they can catch them. because
Sure.
of the colors. It's heavy, so they can't run as fast.
Mm-hmm.
So that would.
Yeah.
It might be difficult to take care of.
Mhm.
Like
Sure.
long plumage in birds
Yeah.
is more attractive to the females, but if they have low quality plumage because they can't take care of it, it's
That's
not a
right.
signal.
Exactly. So that's the basis of the handicap principle that we're going to talk about today in discussion. And it's the idea of an honest signal, and it was first only applied, by the way, to sexual signals, sexual characteristics like Darwin, pointed it out. Why do certain males have all these what seem to be costly traits that would lower their fitness, and yet they're still there and they haven't been removed by natural selection. So this is perhaps something like that. Oh, this is a snake thing again. So anyway, this is just getting back to communication. And if we remember, there was a study that was done by Maneka and OM, and they looked at basically do monkeys learn to fear snakes? Do they have an innate fear built into them that's kind of handed down from generation to generation. In other words, a phylogenetic effect. Or is it possible to have both? And in this case, we learned, so naive monkeys, they had this video set up where in the background they had a whole bunch of wild monkeys going crazy. In the foreground was a snake or a flower. They could adjust it so that it looked in the background like the individuals in the background were going ape over a flower, let's say. And it turns out that if it was just learned, so this is a very strong, it turns out that a snake is a very strong signal for a lot of primates. And obviously we're a primate, and for humans too. I mean, some people in here are probably just terrified of snakes. Some people less so. So a snake is kind of like, well, it's a symbolic presence. We see it in all our iconography and all that kind of stuff. You know, the Bible and many other cultures have snake gods and goddesses and all that. So it turned out it was both. In fact, I think I asked a question for the test about could you have a situation where it's both innate and learned? And this is a good example. Song learning and language in humans, there's a whole bunch of other ones that are like that, where there's an underlying template that is there, species specific, but that perhaps is only activated in the right environment. In other words, in this case, other monkeys going crazy over a snake-like figure or a rubber hose, not a flower. In terms of the anglerfish, predator, is trying to deceive the prey. Now, in the next step in an arms race, you would expect that since there's variation in the prey species in terms of distinguishing a lure from a real meal, that only those that are able to distinguish would survive and reproduce and leave more offspring. And if that's a heritable trait, then you'd have a whole bunch of babies and future adults that would be harder to catch. And then you'd have reciprocal evolution, because if the anglerfish didn't respond, you'd have an anglerfish that was waving something around that was a misleading signal, and they'd go extinct, or they'd lose out in the arms race, and so they perhaps evolve a better and better signal that is harder to discern from a real prey item. So now there's another thing going on. It's that anglerfish is a female, and the male is a little tiny guy. And when the male finds a female, he actually burrows into her, not all the way in, and becomes a sperm delivery device. Okay? So the female might have a whole bunch of males who are basically parasitizing her. They're using her body and her resources as for their own, and then of course in return it's kind of a quid pro quo, but kind of a lousy one, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have, well, some people already know that they have, boyfriends or girlfriends who are parasites, right? So it's kind of like that, but worse. Okay. The Red Queen hypothesis.
Oh, I remember when you'll never catch up because even if you go fast with the person.
Yeah. So you have an antagonistic relationship, predator-prey, pathogens, all sorts of different things, where there's coevolution between one side evolves in response to the other, and then the other evolves a counter, let's say, defense. Okay, so a predator has some sort of way it captures prey. The prey actually evolves so that certain individuals have a better chance of escaping. And then it goes faster and faster, so then the predator evolves a more refined way of catching prey, and on until you finally reach a point where it just kind of, I mean, there's a limit to what an arms race can do. We got into, we get into arms races with the Soviets, with nuclear weapons. We finally got to the place of mutually assured destruction, okay, without actually getting there. But that was the policy that we had. Okay. So camouflage and mimicry and sensor exploitation. So, in other words, a signal that kind of deceives the mark. And what I mean by the mark is the guy you're trying to deceive. So in, let's see, circus terms and shows like that, there was always a mark to get to remove him from his money, basically. Okay. And then, so here's this phosphorus femme fatale. This is another kind of firefly. So the fireflies, the males blink on and off, or the females blink on and off, and the males come in to find the females, and the males blink too. But there's this other species of a female that actually does the same thing, same sort of signal for the species we're looking at, even though she's not the same species. The male comes in and, of course, instead of getting copulations, he gets eaten instead. So, and then female mimics. Talked about this. So here's a female mimic male. In other words, he's a transvestite male. And then there's a big territorial male. So there's two different male types. One of them acts like a hunky male, and the other one acts like, just kind of a female, and the female doesn't seem to recognize that he's in, well, maybe she does, and say, oh, well, he's much easier to deal with than a big hunk who's always causing problems. Okay. Then anglerfish. So, pretty brutal. There we go. Slow motion. Okay. Okay, now I'll get back to okay, so this is net benefit theory, which is basically what it says. a prey responds maladaptively to a predator's signal, and I just gave you some examples of that in terms of the firefly and as well as the anglerfish. Males that avoided deceptive photoreceptor signals might well live longer, but they would probably ignore females of their own species as well. In other words, what they're saying here is that even though they're getting deceived and a proportion of males are actually getting eaten by these, deceivers, they're actually getting lucky sometimes, enough times, to make it worthwhile, even though they might get eaten by these interlopers. So in terms of net benefit, there's a benefit even though they lose a substantial number of males this way. And perhaps there's heritable variation in some males not responding that way. But it's hard to say. I don't know exactly what the study looked at. So, the problem is you don't want males that actually don't respond to females, because that's not a good strategy either. So, let's see. What outcome would falsify the net benefit hypothesis? And what other anti-predator hypothesis? Any ideas? It's slightly different than the Red Queen. Okay, so that's what it's looking at. It's looking at a Red Queen, a reciprocal arms race. In this case, it's saying males who aren't too discernible are still the ones who are leaving more offspring, because they're still mating with the real females of their species, even though a certain number of them get knocked off by these interlopers. So, let's see. A lot of birds have this high Z call that's similar among many divergent groups of species. So, where are we? This is an American robin. It's part of the thrush family. These two are part of the chickadee family. This is, it looks like an oak titmouse, and then probably a mountain chickadee or something like that. And higher pitched sounds are actually more difficult to locate. In fact, when I was working on my master's degree, I was looking at a relative of the robin. It's called the varied thrush, found in the Northwest. And the male makes a very, very high-pitched kind of sound. It's kind of ethereal, but it's also, a lot of times you can't determine where it's actually coming from. I'll be looking somewhere and I'm thinking, oh, it's certainly over there somewhere. I can't see it, and it's actually right behind me or something like that. So, black-capped chip. Okay, so it wasn't a mountain tufted titmouse. I was wrong. It was right up there. All I had to do was read. Actually, I think I got the song here. Let's see. No. I guess not, I don't. Okay, doesn't matter. So you can actually, I thought I embedded the sound that you could actually hear the similarity between the two. Oh, what is this an example of in terms of evolution by natural selection? So there's three ways that an animal can have a certain trait. One way is what?
Divergent.
What?
Divergent.
Divergent selection. Okay. Another is what?
Convergent. Convergent,
Convergent, okay. And what about the other last one?
shared ancestry.
Ancestry. Got it. So which one is this?
Oh, me?
Yeah,
Oh.
well, you know it.
Divergence? No, convergent.
Robin, titmouse, they're different lineages. Sorry, no, at least he's talking. The rest of you just sit on your bum. Sorry about that. No, I want people to stand out, even if they don't know. But he knew.
Of course.
He just needed a little help responding correctly. This is kind of an evolutionary arms race, right? There's an evolution for you to respond correctly, and there's also evolution for divergent selection between you and me, like a
Reinforcement behavior, too.
yeah, it is. That's right. So you're reinforcing me, maybe, or the other way
Or
around.
both ways.
Both ways. Okay. God, that's right. Reinforcement. Okay, I'm learning something every day. Okay. So this is convergence, right? We have two different lineages. The two on the right are related. The one on the left is not. And they both have the same sort of call to distract predators. It's an alarm call that tells us kind of their conspecifics, or not conspecifics, others, that there's a predator in the area without drawing the predator or too much attention to themselves. Oh. So, heliconius butterflies, you've probably come across them. Did we go into that in this class? Well, you've had them elsewhere. They're very well studied genus. They're found in South America and Central America, and actually in Mexico. So there's a whole bunch of different species. Why do they have, well, their wings are brightly colored. Why might their wings be brightly colored?
To scare off predators, to keep predators away.
So it's kind of like an advertisement, right? So that's aposematic coloration. That is a signal that basically is honest to the predators, like, don't eat me because you're just going to get sick if you eat me. And, well, it turns out that the females look at wing patterns in the males and get turned on as well. So here's a trait, instead of acting where the trait actually lowers a male's fitness, even though, but he gets more copulation, so lowers a male's survival, but still gets more offspring out of it. They're all actually going in the same direction. So because these species have this bright color pattern and the females find it nice, you get this situation. It's called a magic trait. And a magic trait, instead of being natively related, the trait to predators versus the female, they're actually going in the right direction. And so there's a whole bunch of different species. There's Mullerian mimicry. So there's a whole bunch of species that co-occur that the more there are, but they're also all distasteful as well. So obviously the more there are, the fewer chances a predator is going to be confused about the signal. So here's a look at creating new hybrid species. Now it turns out evolution and speciation 101 is basically the whole idea is reproductive isolation and not creating hybrids with the same or better fitness. I got to go to that too. Okay, I got it. Now, so here's a map. Oh, and by the way, this is called a species swarm. And up above is looking at haplotypes for various species. And so, let's see. Cydno, now, these are different species, supposedly. This is a separate species, but closely related. And here's this actual hybrid. And because there was variation in the wing color pattern, it kind of actually created a new species. It's called the species swarm, where things actually haven't differentiated completely. A good example of that is the Rift Valley Lake cichlid fish, where there was, like in Lake Victoria, there was, I don't know, 500 different species that were all recent, because it was a dry lake at one point and then got flooded. And there was an ancestor in that lake. And they diversified into all these different ecological niches. One of them was the one that goes in and takes chunks out of another one, and so there's back and forth evolution of, the one that's more common has lower fitness, and the one that's rare has higher fitness. So it's a dynamical thing. So anyway, this is an example where you can actually have hybrids are supposed to not create new species, but having one species or two populations merge into one. In this case, it's actually created a new species. So, okay. No, I can do this. Okay, so so there's a whole bunch of different hypotheses, so that's good. And it would probably be pretty easy to find out, right? I think it's been found that it's more in the deer in the headlights sort of effect. You can imagine an alien, with that kind of coming at you, and you're kind of mesmerized like the deer, and the alien comes along and grabs you up with that, and away you go.
Do they usually live in habitats that are not so, with no sun? Usually, like are they usually in deep oceans?
No, they're usually in shallow ocean water. Yeah. So this wouldn't work if it's a visual display. It obviously, well, no, it would work in the dark. Yeah, it would work really well.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So, but I think it's in fairly shallow. But it might be at night or same sort of thing. So, signals in terms of communication, there's all different kinds of them, as we're kind of exploring here. Okay, let's stop and talk about Zahavi.